We thought we'd check in with a bull and a bear where we stand right now. On the bull side, we've got Scott Martin at Kingsview Asset Management. We got Gary B. Smith, I guess slightly more bearish, a Kadita Group president, much more. So, Gary, ending with you, begin with you. You're cautious, right? What you're concerned?
Well, Neil, I'm always the villain in these. I want to know why that is.
But you're a smiling.
You choose that.
I'm an evil villain, I suppose. But look, you just look at some of these nutty valuations. What's the PE on Tesla's 1100? Apple, which my gosh, you got to talk about it every day, I suppose. But it's more than doubled since the March lows. I mean, these kind of gains, Neil, are just unsustainable. And the rhetoric I'm hearing, it sounds like 2000 all over again, where people saying, yeah, I understand the market's up. I understand the valuations are crazy, but it's different this time. It just, Neil, I mean, at best, I am cautious right now.
You know, Scott, you could look at an Apple, you could look at a Tesla, you could look at an Amazon. You know, they're making money. Back in 2000, when we had this sort of implosion going on, before everything just hit the fan, there were a lot of companies that were riding forward with no earnings, no prospect of ever making money. So they got punished. So you could look at this as a different market in that sense. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Neil, some of those companies, old favorites of mine, Pets.com, to bring up some bad memories, Webvan, I mean, they didn't even have a real business. I mean, these are companies that Gary points out are expensive, but they do have a real business. They do have real sales. The funny part about today's market, Neil, I think, yes, there are areas that are very expensive, but there are areas to us at Kingsview that are very cheap. Things in the energy space, for example, things in financials that I've been talking a lot about on Fox Business in the summer. Look at JP Morgan, Citigroup, two names we own. These are companies that are trading in the mid-teens, to use a term that Gary used as far as PE ratios, price to earnings. So this market is expensive in areas. It can tell a tale however it wants to be told with respect to, yes, there's stuff that's way overvalued. But in my opinion, in energy and financials especially, maybe some industrials too, as the global economy refires, those are companies that we're starting to look at picking up here at cheap valuations relatively.
You know, Gary B., the other concern that might sort of dissuade the bearish argument is that so many remain bearish, or at least concerned, that you're not alone in these concerns. And that is very different than the late 1990s bull market going into 2000. Does that give you any comfort?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole kind of wall worry, I suppose, when no one's concerned, everyone's in the market and can only go down. But yeah, listen, I think actually, I think that's what's propping up the market right now. That's why you're having these day after day of gains. But, you know, on the flip side of Scott's argument, he points out valued, low value or I guess maybe cheap companies or cheap industries. But there's a reason they're cheap. Look, banks ride on top of the economy, if you will, and there's not an economy in the world right now that's growing. Energy is cheap because for the same reason. Economies aren't growing, they don't need energy, and besides, we have a glut of oil and natural gas and stuff like that. So I would tend to avoid the areas that Scott's looking at, and that's why. And I think the other areas that are going gangbusters are too expensive.
It got no real notice, Scott, but Australia, decades into avoiding a recession, generations came and went, without seeing one. Now it's in one. Does that worry you?
Well, it's one of those canaries in the coal mine that tells you, I guess, to go back to something Gary said, this time it may be different, because you're right. This is something that didn't happen to Australia for decades. Yes, that was COVID related. But I'll tell you, to Gary's counterpoint to my point, I guess, those are times you need to buy companies that are in those industries when things look terrible. It's always darkest before dawn. Neil, as you talked about very astutely, this market, to update it for 2020, has so many haters on it. That's why it's going to probably keep going up into the election. As it becomes more likely that Trump pulls this thing out, the market gets more excited and goes to higher prices and higher levels.
Or that light at the end of the tunnel could just as easily be an approaching train. You have no way of knowing, right? I mean, all right, guys, thank you both very, very much.
Exactly.
A very reasoned discussion on all of this. A couple of developments that could move.